I guess. Welcome to Artscape to Heartscape, where we love to have conversation with artists, or I should say creatives of all kinds from around the world. And tonight, I am so excited to have Jerry Boyd join us. I met Jerry. This is our actual first time. Well, I think we did a Zoom together before this, but this is my first time really getting connected with Jerry. I met him about maybe 3 years ago because Jerry has such an amazing way about himself. I am on several pastel groups, art groups, and I met Jerry because he's the type of person, when you get to know him, he's always so willing to help. And I think, Jerry, we were on a Marla Baguetta site, and you came on and was offering some advice. I was really new with pastels, and there was something about the way that you would engage with the Marla and other communities that I've seen you on, and I just always admired that. The way that you engage in offering help, or just being a voice of great encouragement to the various communities that I've seen you engaging in. I knew there was something different about you that I really wanted to get to know you. And I know that every time I would reach out to you and ask for advice on different pieces that I was working on, you were always so patient and so willing and open to help. And I admire that. And so that's how I met Jerry. And that's when I knew that he's someone that I'd really like to know, because I saw even in his writing that there was something special about this artist, this man of faith. And you never used any kind of faith language, but I knew in the way that you engaged that you were a man of faith. So it came out. And that's what I love. I love meeting people who are like that. And so thank you. And thank you for being willing to come on. What I love, and now you're on mute, but what I also love is I love to introduce convergence to various artists, and I love to introduce artists to our convergence community. So welcome, welcome, welcome. So why don't you talk about, Jerry back in the day was a billboard artist. And I just remember as a kid, when we would be on our drives, I always thought that the billboard artists or artwork that was on billboards were people who were just painting, not painting, but like pasting the artwork onto the board. And then when I started to get to know you as a billboard artist, I found that fascinating. So how did you get involved with that? You're on mute. Yep, there you go. Jerry, you're still on mute. You have to unmute yourself.
There you go. That
There
right?
you go. Yep.
All right. I have to do work on this thing. Okay. Well, this is an example, I think, of how God opens doors where you don't think there might be any. I was in high school back in about 1960. I was a junior in high school. My brother-in-law had been a delivery truck driver for soft drinks around the San Fernando Valley and Los Angeles. I was living in North Hollywood with my parents. And I was an art major in high school. I was interested in art, and I seemed to have some talent in that regards. And so I was looking for a career in art, but I didn't know how that was going to look. We didn't have a lot of money. My parents were, I was the last of 4 children, and my parents were getting retirement age, and they didn't have the means to send me to art school or anything like that. So I kind of had dismissed that from my thinking, never really even looked into it, to tell you the truth. And, but anyway, one day my brother-in-law ran into somebody who was posting billboards, the paper. And he talked to the guy and found out how much they make, and it was more than he was doing. So he applied for a job, and he got a job working out of the San Fernando Valley, which is where we lived. And so he started pasting up billboards. Now, I had never even thought about it. But one day, he and I were pretty close, my brother-in-law and I. So one day he said, I have to go down to Los Angeles to the main plant and do some business. You want to ride along with me? And I said, yeah, that would be fun. That decision right there made a difference in my life, you know, but I didn't think anything of it at the time. But we went down there. We arrived at in the middle of Los Angeles. He said, I have to go to the offices to do, you know, whatever business I have. Why don't you walk down to the paint department, those buildings right there, and take a look, you know, inside. So I did. I walked down there, and there's like big buildings, almost like a small airplane hangar. And I walked in, and I was blown away, because here was all these men in there on hydraulic lifts or electric lifts, with billboards on racks in a row. Both buildings were the same type of buildings, one newer than the other. But these artists were hand painting these huge billboards by hand with oil paint, and turn around, press the button, and go up to a new level and paint, and, you know, come down and move along the board. They'd have to push their lift, but they'd move along the board. The boards measured 14 feet high and 48 feet long. And those were considered the small ones. But there was, you know, that was as large a billboard they could handle indoors. So I was just amazed. And they were painting all kinds of advertisements, from Coca-Cola to automobiles to just about anything you can name. And what skill they displayed, you know. And right away, my thoughts were, wow, I wish I could learn to do that. So I talked to some of them. Nobody bothered me. They let me look around, walk through the place. And so I returned there several times whenever I had a chance to go down with my brother-in-law or someone. So that was part of the success, because I displayed interest. I showed interest in that. And so after a while, they started telling me about an apprentice program. And the program was to train future artists to paint billboards. But they kept 3 apprentices on at all times. And the apprenticeship was a 5-year commitment. And so when one of them would finish the apprentice program and be promoted to journeyman, they would hire another one. So as you can see, there wasn't a lot of opportunities there.
Right.
There was only one job to come along every couple of years or so. So I eventually talked to the boss. The boss asked me to bring in some of my own work, which I had a few watercolors and things that weren't very impressive, but I brought them in and showed them to him. He said, no, stay in school, but he said, we're interested in you. So I did, and in my senior year, the last semester of my senior year, I went down and he said, do you want to try painting a large sample piece? And I said, sure. You know, he says, I'll give you the paint and the brushes, and I'll give you a panel and you can take it home and paint it at home and then bring it back. So he said, get a picture of an attractive young girl or something from a magazine and bring it to me, and I'll have a pattern made in our pattern department, and we'll get you started. So I said, great. So I got a picture on the back cover of a National Geographic magazine. It was a Coca-Cola advertisement. It was an illustration of an attractive young girl model that was probably painted by the artist Haddon Sundblom out of Chicago. I recognized the style later, but at that time I didn't know. So, but anyway, I took that in. So it was not a photograph, but a photo of a painting of an illustration. So, and Haddon Sundblom had a distinctive style, very soft edges and so forth. So I took it in. He had the pattern made for me and the brushes and the paint, and I went home. He said, I don't have a panel right now, but I will get you one. So I went home, and because of the difficulty in transporting a panel, I just went to the hardware store and got a piece of masonite, 4x8 piece of masonite, and put the pattern on. You know, I mean, I primed that masonite, got it ready, and then I started working on it. Well, my mistake was that I didn't call him back and tell him that that I had already started on it. He was waiting for me to come and get the panel, and I never showed up. And about a month later, I mean, it took me a month, and this was just before I graduated from high school. It took me about a month to work on this. You know, I had no idea. I'd never painted in oil before in my life, other than one of those, you know, paint by the number things that they had. So I was completely inexperienced, but I managed to do a decent job for a 17-year-old, 18-year-old then. So I finally called him, and when he answered the phone, he was a little upset with me. And he said, where have you been? You were supposed to get a panel. And I explained to him, oh, I'm sorry, I got my own panel, and I've painted, you know, the picture, and I'll bring it down. So that's what I did. On the strength of that, he hired me as an apprentice. And he later told me that although I had done a pretty decent job with it, he was more impressed that I actually followed through and did it, because he had people, young people, applying and then never came back, you know.
So you were with them for 5 years as an apprentice?
So then part of the apprenticeship was they sent you to a private teacher for just fine art in West Los Angeles, an older guy. And so he taught classes one night a week. And so they sent me there. I was required to go. And they also had classes on billboard painting at Los Angeles Trade Tech, which is downtown Los Angeles. So I did that for 5 years, yeah. And then I graduated to journeyman after that. But
Okay.
it was a step-by-step process. I started in the mixing room, learning how to mix paint and match paint. And that was an education in itself because I didn't know anything about that. So I learned that very thoroughly. The art classes that I took in fine art out with Theodore Lukatz was the art teacher's name. He was old school art teacher. Didn't put up with any nonsense and that sort of thing. So yeah, I got a real academic training there.
Wow.
And in the meantime, met my wife and we got married. And when I graduated to be a journeyman, we were expecting our first child.
So that was your actual full-time job as an artist. You were a journeyman. And
Yes.
that's what they call billboard artists. I want to.
Yeah, there was another level above that called pictorial artist. And the pictorial artists did the finest work and the most difficult work. The journeyman would letter and do simple billboards.
Okay.
But the pictorial artists got higher pay. And they did work like you see right here on the screen. I painted the 3 on the left right here. I mean, on the right.
Right.
So I painted those 3 heads. I was working with another guy who was also a pictorial artist. He did 3 other heads on the left.
And approximately what size is this?
This is one we painted outdoors in the middle of San Francisco. And that would be about 60 feet long by 25 feet high. Just the billboard itself, but it would be on a pole up in the air about 40 feet. So we worked on a swing stage.
Oh my gosh.
Pulling ourselves up by ropes and tying off. We had a sort of a safety harness. There I am painting Tony Danza, the actor with Who's the Boss. There we go. There's the finished one. They were doing reruns by this time. But that was 32 feet high by 60 feet long. So his head.
And how long would it take for you to do something like this?
I had a helper who did the lettering while I was doing the actual pictorial or portrait. And he would so he did all the lettering. I don't think I did any of the lettering on this. He was a journeyman and I was the pictorial artist. So they trusted me with the big heads. Incidentally, this showgirls down here in the center, I also painted that one. That was just incidental, but it was from a closer vision of that. So, and that was from some Las Vegas show.
Right.
So it would take probably a week to a week and a half to paint those, because there was a lot of logistics involved. This was on the top of a 3-story building right by the freeway. So we'd have to climb up a ladder, which went up the side of the building to get onto the board, onto the roof of this building. Mm-hmm. And then rig our swing stage and all of that. So there's quite a bit of work involved before you even started painting.
Right. So Jerry, fast forward. Okay, first of all, how long were you a billboard artist? How many years?
42 years.
42 years.
Yeah,
And it all started by saying yes to your brother-in-law to take a ride.
that's exactly right.
I
Yeah.
love that. I love that.
I'll have to amend that. There was a couple of years where business was slow and I got laid off from the company I was working for in Oakland. And, as any business goes, things rise and fall.
Right.
And so there was a slow period where sales of billboard, were tough. So I got laid off in Oakland, and I had to get a job in a regular sign shop.
Okay.
And I wasn't trained to lay out signs, and so I was a bit of a disadvantage.
Mm-hmm.
But I got on to a company in San Jose that were painting housing tract signs, advertising new homes that you see every time,
Yep.
you see a
A
new
new
house
development goes up or right.
development. So, and they made patterns for that. So
Right.
I was able to do that. I could letter very well.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that I didn't know how, it wasn't required to me to lay out the lettering, which is a whole different skill.
Yeah.
So, but I also had the advantage of if they had any picture on some of these things, I could handle that with
Right.
ease. So I worked there. I worked there for a couple of years, and actually 2 or 3 places. And
So
then
fast forward, you did
Yeah.
this for quite some time. And then when I meet you, by the time I meet you, you're this unbelievable pastelist. So
Yeah.
when were you doing pastels, and did you continue doing watercolor this whole time, or after you finished, how did you get involved with the pastels?
Well, my sister actually introduced me to pastels. I was 14 years old when we moved from Oregon down to Southern California. And my sister liked to dabble in it a little bit. She had a little bit of artistic interest and talent. So she introduced me to pastels, and I started doing them at home. I got a little bit larger set, but not very big, but I could do some things with that. And I really liked it. I liked the forgiving quality of it and the ease in application, the fact you could set it down and go away and do something else and come back, and you didn't have dried paint to worry about or anything. So I started doing, when I was in high school, I started doing portraits of fellow classmates for $5, and I got a good enough likeness. They were satisfied, I guess. And so I did that off and on during high school. And I had an English literature teacher that kind of mentored me. It was surprising. You would think it would be an art teacher, but this English teacher took a liking to me, I guess, and she became a kind of a mentor. And so she got me into working with the journalism class. We produced our own newspaper in this high school, had a printing shop and everything. So I was cutting linoleum block prints for the various things for the sports teams and all that stuff. And eventually this English teacher had me paint a portrait for her. And then she suggested I do one of the principal of the school, which I did and donated to the school. I've often wondered whatever happened to that, but I got a good likeness from a photo, of him. He was a well-loved and respected principal. So that's kind of how I got involved with pastel. And I would do it off and on. I painted in oil and I painted in watercolor and acrylics when they came along, that sort of thing. But I always went back to pastel every once in a while.
So tell me, how has your faith impacted your work?
Well, for one thing, I've gone to, I was raised in a Christian home, and so I've been going to church all my life. And when I was 14 years old, the pastor asked me to do a poster for the little church we were going to in Burbank, which incidentally is the same one I met my wife in. But anyway, they had a men's fellowship meeting scheduled, and he asked me to do a poster for that, which I did. And that became a bit of a hit for my age and so forth. So from then on, every church that I've been in, they soon discovered that I had some skills and put me to work, doing Christmas play background scenery and Easter pageant things and illustrated sermons. There was just all kinds of projects that I've done over the years, many, from just small little projects to huge, spectacular, large things, that became a blessing, I guess, and a testimony to other people.
That's beautiful. So what are you doing now with your art? And well, I know what you're doing now, and share with us what you're doing now with your art and your time.
Yeah, I in the early 1990s, maybe even the late 80s, the billboard business began to change, and technology started creeping in to, like so many other jobs, to displace you. They made a big computer printing machine. At first, the only one that was around was in Los Angeles, multi-million-dollar machine. But they switched from painting billboards on plywood panels, which is what we were doing. A normal billboard of 14 by 48 size was made up of 4-foot wide tongue and groove panels that fit together in a rack. So there was seams every 4 feet, but they were not noticeable when you painted it. They're not very noticeable. So, but then they changed to a different system, and we started painting on a vinyl canvas.
Right.
That would be stretched around the plywood billboard with a ratchet system to tighten it on the backside, much like you'd stretch a canvas to paint on. And this vinyl canvas was seamless. It was vulcanized together, but it was seamless essentially, and stretched tight. And that's what you see today when you drive down the highway, is that canvas. Well, at first we were painting on it. Matter of fact, I painted the very first one that they did. They brought it into Berkeley where for our area, I was the first one to paint on this canvas, and I didn't know how it would take paint. I don't know if the first one, I can't remember if the first one we painted on the raw canvas or whether we primed it. Later, we would prime it with an acrylic blockout type paint, white, and then we would paint over that with the oil paint like we usually did. So I painted the first one. It was an automobile, I remember. And then after that, we started painting them on canvas, but that was at the same time they were developing this machine. And so I remember one day, one of the upstairs office people came down, manager, and told us that we better be prepared because these machines were going to take over,
Right.
And this was in the early 90s. And so at first, if it was just a one of a kind job, we would get billboards for small businesses and they would only order one of them, we could actually do it cheaper than the machine could at first. But as technology improves and so forth, and then for multiple billboards of the same kind, and during my career, I would often paint 3 or 4 of the exact same billboard in oil, hand painted. So I'd do it several times. I didn't like to do that. I got sick of it after 2 or 3 of them. But anyway, when the machine come along, of course, they could print it much faster
Right.
than we could paint it. It would be much cheaper in the long run. So that eventually men started being laid off. We had one woman too that painted, excuse me, and she got laid off, and I was actually off on vacation one summer, and I think in 92, and I came back to work and half of the crew had been laid off.
Gone, yeah.
I didn't even know. So, and it went on that way till I was the last man standing.
Right.
In Berkeley. We had a helper or two, and they had sent one artist to a little plant over in Stockton. But I was the last painter left. I was a senior painter there. So I'd been there for about 30 years. And so they were keeping me busy, but I was going out. I hated it. And I was going out doing maintenance painting on the structures, painting the posts and
Right.
and touching up graffiti and that sort of thing. So, yeah, so later in the 90s, when it was almost 2000, we ran into little financial difficulty in Fremont where we lived, and I knew that retirement was on the horizon for me, and because of the housing cost and all, I wouldn't be able to make it. So we explored over in the Sacramento area, which is inland, from by about 100 miles, and from Fremont. And I found out that the price of housing in Fremont was twice the amount that the housing was over by Sacramento. And so I realized that would be a way for me to get out from under debt and a burden, make it, possible to
Yeah,
retire.
so you were able to
So
go,
they allowed me to transfer over to that same little company in Stockton.
mhm,
And so I did. So we bought a house, we moved over there to Galt, and I went to Stockton and I worked there about almost 2 years, and I retired in on Halloween Day
okay.
of 2003.
Oh, okay. So
So
now
there's
what are you doing, Jerry?
so
You're
it's
still
been
painting,
20 years now that
right?
I've been retired. In the meantime, during that year that we moved over there, I built a studio
Right?
in our backyard. Excuse me for,
A very nice studio, I might add.
yeah, it took me a year to build it. I did most of the work myself.
Yeah, it's really
And
beautiful.
so as soon as it was completed, I retired. And in the meantime, I had gotten involved with the Pastel Society of the West Coast. I knew a lady on the board, and I had been entering that pastel show since 1987. They began in 1985, and I took a trip over from Fremont to Sacramento to take a look at their show. I was impressed with the work, and I thought, gee, this is pretty nice. So I entered the next year and got a couple of paintings into the show. And then but I was 100 miles away from their headquarters, so I couldn't really do it. And I was still working full time. But as soon as I retired and I moved over there into the area, the lady that I knew from Fremont, who was now on the board and living over in the Sierra foothills, she contacted me and said, hey, could you help us out? And she got me involved, invited me to come to the board. They interviewed me. They welcomed me to the board, and I joined their board of directors in 2005. So
And so
now I was involved in the
yeah,
Pastel Society. Yeah.
and you do a lot of jury, like do a lot of jury type of work for them, and you're still entering a lot of shows, and I might add, you're winning a lot of awards for your work, which is absolutely gorgeous.
Thank you. Yeah.
And also, it seems like, are you teaching at all?
I don't teach on a regular basis, never have taught on a regular basis. I've conducted workshops.
Yeah, the
3
workshops,
days. I
right?
did when I was in Fremont. I taught a series of classes, like once a week
Right.
for a month or something. But yeah, I haven't done a whole lot of teaching, but I have taught workshops on occasion.
But let me ask you one quick question, because I want to give some time for some of the members if they want to ask you some questions. But as an artist, and you've been an artist for a very long time, and as an artist, how do you stay engaged? Because I'm hearing a lot of artists talk about, it's lonely being an artist, and how do you manage to stay so engaged in community? What are your thoughts about that? Because
Yeah,
you're connected.
Yeah. Years ago, that was a big problem, because we didn't have the social media
Right.
that we do now. So you felt isolated. But I've always, like a young artist coming up, my advice is to get connected with a local art group. Now, it's usually all media type of thing, where everybody does their own specialty, whatever. But that's how I got started in the early 70s. I found an art club in Fremont, where we lived. And it was over in the Bay Area between San Jose and Hayward or Oakland. It was right in between there. And they had a local art club. And so I went to it. They would typically have a monthly meeting. You were invited to bring, if you joined, I guess, the club, you were invited to bring a piece that you had done during that month and put it up for display. And maybe 10 artists would bring things, or maybe a little more. The program would be, they would have a guest artist, someone who was maybe prominent. They would come in and do a demonstration painting for the group. There might be 30 to 50 people watching, artists, and they would be taught by the person.
Right.
They did a demonstration painting of whatever specialty they did, maybe a landscape or a still life, whatever, in either oil or watercolor or pastel or any of the mediums. And they would describe their process as they went along.
Right.
So it was a very good learning experience. Plus, you met people there that were interested in art, so you got connected in that way. And eventually I got, elected president after a while, and that sort of thing. But I remember I spent a time being the program chairman, and that job was to find guest artists to come in and do their demos each month. And one month, I got contacted by the guest artists, and they had something come up and they couldn't make it. They had to cancel. So I said, well, I can do something maybe. And so that's what I did. So I did a sort of a demonstration of how billboards were done.
Right.
And it wasn't actual painting. I had prepared some things on large sheets of paper beforehand.
Right.
And it was more of a lecture type thing than a demo.
Okay.
But then I thought, hey, this is pretty cool. And some other art club heard about it and said, could you come and do that? So I did. And then I got brave enough to do an actual painting in front of our art group. And I surprised myself at how well it turned out. It was a still life. I still have the painting, but so then word got around,
Right.
Artists are connected to each other and they say, hey, this guy over here is pretty good. You can invite him to do a demo. So eventually I got brave enough to start doing portraits, which is not too many artists are willing to chance doing a portrait, because if you don't get a likeness, it's a fail,
Right.
But I developed that skill. So I started getting invited quite a lot so I never kept track or anything, but I've done well over 100 of those portrait type things to various art clubs over the years.
Right.
And not all of them different. I'd be re-invited back, several times, but over the years, but yeah.
Well,
So-
I want to stay true to our time. Okay.
Right,
So
yeah.
I want to at least give a couple of people an opportunity if anyone has a question. Convergence. If anyone has a question for Jerry, now is your time. I didn't get to really ask you about your creative process and all of that, but maybe someone has a quick question for Jerry Boyd before we wrap up.
Question?
Great.
Sure.
I'm just imagining the amount of time standing out there painting those billboards. I'm sure it's true of painting in general, but I don't know, something about being outside and being as physical as you have to be to paint at that large of scale. To me, so many times the creative process, I don't know, when I'm in those zones, my head goes all kinds of places, maybe about myself, maybe it's prayer, maybe it's just kind of thinking about the world in general. Just wonder what you think about. What did you think about when you were up there for hours and hours painting? What went through your mind?
Well, you know, after you're experienced quite a while, you can think about all kinds of things and still kind of stay on point with your painting. And so my mind would be all over the place, from family matters to just world history and whatever. But I would still be painting. And of course, you have to pay attention. You're in some pretty hairy situations. You're way up there. You're climbing, we would pull up to the top of the board, tie off. We have a little ladder, little aluminum ladder with hooks that would go over the top of the board. And maybe you're up, 50, 60 feet, or more. And you would have to unhook from your safety line, grab that ladder and grab the top of the board and swing your leg over and to the deck that was behind it, the catwalk, and then climb down the ladder that's on the back of the board. So, but now we would just do that. As long as I had something sturdy to hold on to, I wasn't in fear. But there's a lot of people that have fear of heights. I didn't particularly like it, but I could do it. So yeah, a lot of people ask me why, or how you would correct your mistakes, or how you would gain the perspective, because you're so close up to it that it's hard to see the big
Right.
picture, if you will. So, sometimes the eyeballs of the person, like on that one of Tony Danza, would be, as big as a large beach ball, just the eyeball. So, but it's surprising that with experience, I would get down at the end of the day and I would look back up at the board, and I would make mental notes about what I needed to correct or, fix. And one thing about the hardest thing painting on a large scale like that is to make soft blends from one value,
Right.
darker to lighter, or from one color to another. Straight lines, though, could be pretty rough. I mean, I tried to make them as straight as I could, but even if they were waving around a little bit, the distance would make them look straight as an arrow.
Mm.
On the other hand, the blends would look harder at a distance, would be more noticeable if you made a mistake. So, but I would get down, and at the end of the day, we were ready to go back to the shop, I would make mental notes. It's just interesting. I didn't have to write them down or anything. I just would stand there, look at the artwork I was copying, the photo that I was copying, and I would look up at the board and I had to say, okay, that hairline needs to be a little softer. This edge over here needs to, as a turn, needs to be a little richer in color, that sort of thing. And then I would go on. And the next day when I came out there, looked up at the board before I began, I would remember those mental notes that I made, and I'd go up there and correct them.
Wow.
So, but you could you could think about all kinds of things, you
Right.
know,
Right.
you'd have to come back into focus every once in a while to make sure
Sure.
you're, but otherwise, yeah. And it's all experience. It's like everything else you do in life.
Yeah.
The more you do it, the better you get
Better.
at it.
Yeah.
And yeah.
All right. I think we have time for one more question. Okay, Joanna.
Thank you for sharing. I have one important question. Could you share your daily routine right now with us? Thank you.
Okay, well, my daily routine, of course, I've been the shipping agent for this art show for the Pastel Society of the West Coast for 18 years, and this is my last year, but it involved a lot. So this last week was crazy busy because I had to bring back 80 paintings from the Hagen Museum in Stockton, where the show was, bring back to my studio, get the boxes they were shipped to me down from my loft above in the workspace of my studio, and then repack the paintings into their boxes, put the return label on them, and get them shipped back to the artist. But that's a special week
Right.
or two. But normally my routine is, sometimes it's a few days before I get involved in a new project. Once I get the drawing done for a new painting, then I start getting mentally involved and I get anxious to get out there and work. But I kind of go in spurts, I'll get enthused about several projects and work on that, and then I'll have a period of rest where I don't do any of that, and I'll do other things. But I'm I'm not a real morning person, but by 10 or so, I'll get out there and work for a few hours. I'm getting older, so I don't work as many hours as I used to.
So what are you working on now?
Well, I've got a portrait commission that I've just started, and then I had to stop it because of this shipping
The show,
business.
right?
But I've got 5 more paintings to pack, which I'll do as soon as I leave this Zoom meeting, and then I'll have those ready to take to the shipping company that's about a mile away, and then I'm done with that. So I'm almost finished. Yeah, I've got this portrait commission that I have drawn and laid out, roughed in, and I'll continue working on that. For a couple, a man at our church is going to surprise his wife with a portrait from a photo that he had from a few years ago, and for their anniversary in February. But he's been after me for a while to do this, so I thought I need to get it done now.
And this
And
is a pastel.
it's pastel, yeah.
That's great.
I
Well,
do
Jerry Boyd,
portraits. Yeah,
what's
I do
that?
portraits. I say I do portraits in oil,
Right,
but most of them in pastel.
right, which I absolutely love. Jerry Boyd, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for being the person that you are.
Thank you.
As you all can tell, whenever you see Jerry's posts, he always has a very detailed, interesting story. He's a great storyteller for his paintings, and he remembers things and shares his stories on these different sites, and I always enjoy reading them. And thank you for being who you are.
Okay.
And thanks for taking the time out to spend it here with Artscape to Heartscape with Convergence.
If you're on Facebook, nice to meet all of you. If you're on Facebook or anything, just look me up, Jerry Boyd, send me a message, mention this Zoom meeting, I'll friend you and we can have a Facebook relationship. So
Very good. All right,
my
Jerry.
website, you can, yeah, I have a
Yeah,
website.
put your website in the chat.
Yeah, it's geraldboyd.com, but it's attached to a company named FASO, F-A-S-O, which means Fine Art Studio Online. But it's F-A-S-O, Gerald Boyd.
Is Gerald with a G or a J?
Gerald Boyd.
There you go.
Yeah.
Thanks, Cornelia. Okay. All right.
All right.
Well, thank you very, very much. This was really nice. And
Thank you,
I
Adrian.
see that Patrice put on there that thank you so much, Jerry. She's feeling inspired.
Good, good.
And I think the feeling of inspiration is what I heard is what I always say is to say yes. You don't realize how many times we say no and we miss out on an opportunity, and you know, your life would have been different.
Yeah,
It would have been so much different had you not said yes to your brother-in-law to even go. And then when he went down, you went down to the spot and then he said, go and check out that place. Your
yeah.
eyes were opened. And so I just love to hear stories of how God works in individuals' lives to be able to go out and be and to make and do what you were called to do.
Well, the timing, the timing was essential because there was only one job in
That
the
was
whole of
available.
Los Angeles. There was only one job at that one particular time that I graduated from high school. I actually secured the job before I graduated.
Right.
The boss told me to take a week off and then come to work. So I
Amazing.
started there June 26, 1961.
Unbelievable. That's great.
Yep.
Well, thank
Okay.
you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Adrian. Thank
Okay.
everybody for listening.